Welcome to another video, part of this Django series where we're building a filter form. In this one, we're going to be linking the backend and frontend, where the frontend is built with React. So we're going to start linking the requests from that React frontend with the Django REST framework. And so if you'd like to follow along, you can just go to our DJ Filter GitHub repository. You can clone or download this. And so once you've got that inside your editor, then let's get started. So I've got my virtual environment activated here, and what I'm going to do is just open up another terminal, and one of them is going to be for the front end and the other one will be for the back end. So what we'll do is we'll run Python manage.py run server in this one, and in the other one we'll run npm start. Cool, so let's jump into the code now that that's running. So we'll go into the source folder, into the containers, to the form, and I'm just going to minimize that. And if we scroll up to these search bars, we actually forgot to add in these field decorators, and that's very important with &d because this is actually the name of the input that you use to get the value from it once the form is submitted. So we're just going to add those in. Cool, so now we've added that in. So we've got the search title as the first one, then search title ID, and then we've got search title or author as the third one. And so what I'm going to do is just go up here to this handle submit, and we're just going to take a look here at what gets logged out. So if we just inspect here, and if we just enter anything in there and click submit, then we can see these are all of the field decorators that we specified here in our form items. So like search title ID. So those all come through over here, and there you can see the value of the search title is what we've inputted over there. So this is what we're going to use to pass these values into an Axios request, which will then request the backend. And so what I'm going to do is just go to the top of this class, and we're going to add in some state. So we'll have the results, which will just be an empty list. That's what we'll get back from the server. And then we'll also add in a loading, which can be false from the beginning. And we'll have an error, which will be null. And so when loading is true, then we'll display a spinner, which we'll get from &d as well. And if there's an error, then we'll display the error at the top of the form as well. So let's go into &d's documentation. And I'm just going to look for the spin component. And I'm just going to take the one here that's inside this container. If we show the code, this is what it looks like. So we have to import spin from &d. So we'll just bring that here. And then we'll just go to the bottom. And actually what I'm going to do is put the entire form inside a div. So let's just minimize that. And we'll create this div. Then I'll just paste all of that there and make sure that the div only comes after the form. So like this. And then we'll just add in some logic, and we'll say that this spin should also go after the form. And here we'll say if there's an error, which we can get from the state. So we'll say constant error, and we can say loading as well equals this dot state. So we'll say if there is an error, then we'll just show a span tag that just says there was an error. And then we'll show here if loading is true, then we will show the spinner. Otherwise, we're going to show some other component, which will be like our results component. So we'll just put results like that. So if we take a look now, so there we see results is showing, but we don't want it to be like this. We want it to be a list of the results like we had in the Bootstrap view. So we're going to create our own container inside containers here, which will be results.js. And here we'll create a container for those journal results. And then I'm also going to create a components folder, and in there we'll just put result map.js. And so this is going to be a singular result item or result component, and this will be the list of those results. And so we'll just start by importing React from React. And then we'll just say constant results, which will just be a stateless component, and it's going to take in the journals, which will pass it as a property. And we're then going to return some JSX. So this is just going to be an unordered list. And we're going to style it the same way that we did in the Bootstrap view. So we're going to say list style type is none. And then we'll output those journals. So we'll say journals.map. For each journal, we're going to return our result component. So we'll say import result, which will come from our component's result. And we'll say return this result like this. And we'll say that that result is going to take a journal as its property. So we'll say journal equals J. And we'll also give it a key because we're mapping out. So we'll say key equals to j.id. So we'll make sure that we pass an ID in our REST framework response. And then we can just say export default results. And we're going to take those results and we'll import them here at the top. So we'll say import results from results. And then all the way down here, instead of this div, this is going to be results like that. And we're going to want to get that from the state. So we're going to pass the journals property as the results, which will be a list coming from the API response. And so now we can just get this single result component. So we'll say import React from React. We'll say constant result equals to something that takes in an individual journal. And it's also going to return JSX. And we're basically going to render out what we did over here in the Bootstrap form. So I'm just going to scroll down and take all of that and just paste it there. And I'm just going to fix this file up now in terms of syntax. Cool, there we go. So I'm returning a div because we have a list item with a horizontal line, so they can't both be returned. There has to be one single element that's returned, so that's why it's wrapped inside a div. And then we have just the span tags for the title, author, and mapping out the categories as well, and the publish date, view count, and the review. This is exactly the same as it was in the Bootstrap view. And this is just so that we get a space at the end of these lines, so that it's a little bit more spaced out for readability. So now we have the result component, which is being imported into the results, and we're going to map through those results and create that result component. And that's what will be displayed using the results in the state. And actually, if we go back to here, we will also need to get the style for this spinner. We'll just go back here and we'll create a file which we'll just call style.css. Paste that there, and I'll call this the loader div. And in here we can get rid of the background there, and we'll take this style and just import it into app.js. So this is import style.css. Cool, so that's that handled. And now we need to make sure when we submit this, that we submit it in such a way that the backend will be able to handle it correctly. So let's actually just jump to the backend for a second. So I'm going to open up core views, and we'll just scroll down to the bottom here, and we're going to create a class-based component because this is going to inherit from the Django REST framework's list API view. And we'll just call this the React filter view and say that it comes from generics, which we'll import at the top. And so we'll just say from REST framework import generics. And then down here at the bottom, this will be list API view. And the most important thing with these generic views is that we need to pass in the serializer class. And that means that we're going to need to create our own serializer for the journal model. So we'll create a new file here called serializers.py. And here we're going to import from REST framework, import serializers. And we're also going to need our models. So we'll say from .models import journal. We'll also need the category and we need the author. And then we'll say class journal serializer, which is going to come from serializers.model serializer. And here we just specify the class meta, where we'll say the model is the journal, and we'll say fields equals _all. So we're getting all the fields on the journal model. And now we can bring this serializer here into the top of the file. So we'll say from .serializers import journal serializer. And that is our serializer class. And one important thing here is that because we're working with filters, we're going to need to specify the getQuerySet method. And this is a method that you can use to basically handle filtering of the query set that you want to return of this model. So we can say define getQuerySet, and it takes in self like that. And we basically want to access the request in the same way that we do here in this view, where we're getting the request.get, and then we're getting the query parameters from that get request. So you can access the request from the class by just using self.request. And now we don't want to go and do all of this again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take everything all the way up until here. So everything that involves filtering, and we're going to say define filter, which is going to take in a request, and then we'll just paste all of that there and say return query set at the end. So now all we do is use this filter function, and we can pass that into both of these views. So we'll say query set equals to filter request, and we can do the exact same thing here, except pass in self.request and then just say return query set like that. And I see we also need the categories, so I'm just going to go and copy that and bring that in there. So now we're getting all those category objects. And now we can actually go and try this out in the browser. We'll just need to bring this view. So we'll just go to DJ filter and then URLs and just import the view there. And then we'll just say this path is to the API. And we'll say React filter view.as view. And we have to do that because it's a class-based function. And then we can just say that the name is React. So let's go and see this in the browser. We'll just go to localhost/API. And now we can see all of the fields coming through on the journal. But if we look carefully, the author field is an ID and the categories is also an ID. And that means that if we were to go and render that out over here, then that's what we'd be getting. And so we're going to need to change this to return the author's name and return the category's name as well. So we're just going to go back to the serializer and we're going to create a string serializer for those two fields. So we'll just say this is string serializer, which comes from serializers.string related field like that. And then we say define to internal value. You can see it's prompted there, and it's going to take in self and value, and we're just going to say return that value like that. And then we can come here on the journal serializer and we'll say that the author, which is one of the fields, equals to this string serializer where many equals false. And then we can say that the categories, which is another field on the journal, is also a string serializer, but we'll say many equals true because it's a many-to-many field. And so now if we go back and refresh this, now we can see the author's name showing and we can see the category's name showing. And so that means that this data is being returned in the correct way. So now we just need to make sure that in our form here when we submit the request that we just pass in the correct query parameters according to the view. So if we go back to the view here, all of these query parameters, well, these things in the quotations, we need to make sure that we're passing in the query parameters with these names as well. So I'm going to go and copy all of these, and here in form.js, we'll go to the top here and say import Axios from Axios. And then if there are no errors, then basically we want to say axios.get. And for the time being, I'm just going to say HTTP 127 going to the localhost /API. And then we will open up these brackets for the configuration of the request. And we can pass in parameters, which is one of the prompts here. And this is an object of query parameters, which we will paste in all of those fields there. And now we just need to go and make sure that we grab these values from our form validated fields, which is going to be coming from this values callback parameter. So let me comment that out. And again, if we take a look here at this request, if we submit it, you can see that these values, if they're not filled in, are undefined. So that means if we try and pass them in, we'll get some errors if the values are undefined. We want them to at least be empty strings or null. So let's come back here, and we can start off with the title contains, which is this search title, which is the first search bar. And all we would do is just say constant title contains equals to values, and we'll say this is search title. So if we say console.log title contains, and we go back here, then let's just enter something. Now we can see there it's being logged out in the form. However, if we refresh this and submit it again, then you get undefined. And so one way we can do this is just by saying that the title contains equals to, if values of this search title is equal to undefined, then we'll just set it to null. Otherwise, we'll set it equal to that value. And we can then do the exact same thing for the rest of these fields. But before doing that, I just want to show the date min and date max. And so if we take a look at the form again, and if we just go down to time related, then here, if we just view this code, you can see how they're handling the formatting of the range pickers. And we're using this range picker here. So I'm just going to copy the entire thing here, all of this, and we'll just make some space, paste that in, and then we can just get rid of everything that we aren't using, which is all of that, so that we only have the range picker. And the range picker uses the range value, which is this one here, and that's using the field's value of range picker, which if we go down, we can see inside the form, just by scrolling down, you can see range picker there. So that's where it's getting that value from. We can just say constant date min equals to this first value there. And then we can say that date max is equal to the second value. But we'll need to do the same thing as we did here with checking if it's undefined, because if it is undefined, then you won't be able to get the first or second value from this range value. So I'm going to go and do this same logic for all the fields here. So now you can see there's the one for the category. There's view count max, view count min, and reviewed, search title ID, and search title or author, and the last two date values as well. So we can come here and uncomment the params. And then what we also want to do is, before actually submitting the request, we want to make it look like there's a loading taking place. So we'll say this.set state loading to be true. And then we'll say after this response comes back. So we say dot then with that response. We'll then say this dot set state and set loading back to false and set result to response dot data. And then we'll say dot catch for any errors and say this dot set state error as, let's say there was an error. And we can then say something like console.log the error as well. And then we'll just add some commas here as well, and then make a colon there as well. And so lastly, this not reviewed, this needs to be the opposite of reviewed. So if reviewed is true, then that means not reviewed is false. And the way that we can do that is just by saying not reviewed. And so with that, let's go and check this out in our browser. So we'll just keep the console open there. And if we click submit, now we can see all of that data being fetched and being rendered out into the results components. And let's try and make a query. We'll search for pride. Then we see the result comes through. And we can try search for all reviewed, and we can say for sport. And if we submit, then we can see we're also only getting sport, and we can see the reviewed is not working, and that's because reviewed is set to reviewed. So let's go and see where we're getting that. So this is reviewed, which is coming from here where we're getting the value of reviewed, which is this field decorator. And we have the values as reviewed and not reviewed. So we'll need to say if the value is reviewed, then it needs to be on, because that's how we're checking it in this request at the bottom. So if reviewed is on. So we'll just do some extra validation there. So we'll just say if reviewed equals to reviewed, then we'll say reviewed equals to on. And we'll also set not reviewed as null. And then we'll say else if reviewed equals to not reviewed, then we'll need basically the opposite. So reviewed will be null and not reviewed will be on. And so now instead of setting not reviewed to be the opposite of reviewed, we can just leave it like that. So in that case, we'll be manually setting the value of reviewed and not reviewed. And we'll also need to change this to be let so that we can change the value of reviewed. And we'll also set not reviewed equal to null in the beginning. So if we check that, that's all working. And let's come and select reviewed, and we'll say for sport. And if we submit, now we can see that we're only getting the ones that are true. And if we select not reviewed and submit that, now we're only getting the ones that are false. Cool. So that's all working. And now we can say that we've officially finished the React part of this as well. And so that ends off this tutorial series. I know this video has been slightly longer, but I think it was better to just get it all in one video, as it's all encapsulating around one concept, which is this process of fetching data from the API and displaying it in the React front end. So if you've enjoyed this series, then leave a comment down below and let us know what you thought. Let us know what other kinds of series or tutorials you're looking for. And otherwise, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.